Good morning, everyone. I'm Bob Cohen, and I'm co-chair of the Beverly Hills Bar Association ADR section, together with my co-chair, Jeff Kravitz, who's not here this morning. He's out of the country. But I'm pleased to introduce to you Sid Kanazawa, who I've known for about 5 years now. He is a consummate mediator. He's been really successful at everything he's done in his life. I'm not going to embarrass him and tell him about the awards or positions that I know he has held. I know he's on the board of directors of SCMA, I believe. He teaches at Pepperdine University, and he was a very successful big law trial lawyer for many, many years. But he has now switched his focus to mediation, and he said to me earlier this morning as we were talking, he finally feels like mediation is what he set out to do when he first went to law school at USC. And I align with that, and I'm sure you do too. And he loves the process of making people appreciate each other, be kind, come to an agreement, and move on with their lives. And he's a very deep thinker. He wasn't on law review at SC, but I told him I thought he was, because he has a great command of the law and of studies and histories and facts. And today we're going to talk about a subject that is very dear to my heart. It's about apologies. And apology, forgiveness, and reconciliation is the title of this program. And he actually teaches a course at Pepperdine on that, started by Professor Peter Robinson, who was the inspiration behind that course at Pepperdine and taught it for many, many years. And he's taken over, and he is the right guy to be teaching this of everyone I know. So anyway, we'll get right on with the program. And I want this to be a really interactive program. It's going to be very free flowing. We had, Sydney and I had a discussion this morning. We've had many different discussions over the years. And I think the whole idea of apology is so instrumental in trust building and in the mediation process. And Sydney, I'm just going to turn it over to you now, and let's start talking. Why are apologies important in mediation and in life?
Apologies, I think, are an opening to a dialogue and an opening to building trust. And so I think uh, we're reluctant to apologize, and I think that reluctance comes from the Western philosophy that is the basis of our legal system. I was telling Bob earlier that um, during this course, this is the second time I'm teaching the course. Um, I had a guy come in, Michael Hawash, who talked about the going to the battlefields in Russia and Ukraine and all those areas to learn about the history of war out in that area. And he was going there several times after Gorbachev opened up the Soviet Union. And he stopped going there when Putin started to come into power because they were restricting their ability to get access to information and talk to people and all that. And so he went to Vietnam to take these group of scholars to study war and battlefields and talk to the soldiers and different people that were involved. And he tells this story about how he was sitting in front of a lake and a little boy came down and sat next to him and started asking him questions about his country. And he started asking him questions about himself and all of that. And he fully expected that this would lead to the little boy asking him for money or for something or to selling him something. But he never did. And he realized in all of his discussions in Vietnam that the atrocities in Vietnam were as great as the atrocities in the Eastern Front during World War II. But the Russians and the people that were involved there had this attitude of aggrievement because they were not appreciated for how much they
Hello.
sacrificed to win World War II.
Hi.
Um, by contrast, in Vietnam, the people there were looking forward, and they concede that it was a horrible time during what they called the American War.
Going either way,
Um, but
southwest or
but they but they were looking forward and trying to repair relations and going forward. And it dawned on him that this perspective, the perspective of looking backwards versus the perspective of looking forward, was really a difference in the way that the Russians perceived their role and where they were stuck in the past and where Vietnam was in terms of being in the present and looking forward.
Kind of
And
like
that,
keeping score, kind of like.
yeah, and that made me think about why we find it so difficult to apologize. And this is not a formed thought yet. I'm still working on thinking about it, but it dawned on me that in the Western philosophy, we have a philosophy of one way, one truth, one God. And on the Eastern philosophy, it is more about many roads to the top of the mountain, and it's about the relationship that we have with each other in moving forward through life. It's an appreciation of change, and there's constant references in Eastern philosophy about how we evolve and change and go from a bud to a flower to dropping off the trees and the like. And so this perspective is very, very different. But the more I thought about it, I realized that we all are really the same. And that although in the Western philosophy, we believe that there's one objective truth, and therefore it becomes hard to say, I'm sorry, because it's like conceding that I'm wrong or I'm at fault is the way that people think of it.
Right.
And the reason that occurs is because of this philosophy about a static truth, a static one way, that we have to think about things. And um, in reality, though, in terms of our jurisprudence, we don't really find that one truth. We settle 98 to 99% of the cases without finding that one truth. We allow juries to decide 9-3 so that three people disagree with whatever the rest of the jury decided. We agree with a Supreme Court that decides 5-4 so that there's basically four people that don't agree with what the other five have said. And so in reality, we acknowledge in some ways that we have different ways of looking at the world and that there is no one truth and there's no one perspective. I mean, one of the most famous films is Rashomon, and it's about taking one incident and showing that incident in different perspectives. That everybody had a different memory and recollection about what happened in the same incident that occurred, and we recognize this in our trial work as well. That people have different perspectives depending on where they're standing. But it's also based on our own biases, and our biases come from where we were born, where we grew up, the friends that we had, the families that we had. I mean, all kinds of things affect how we see the world. And as a result, apologies are kind of a way of acknowledging, we're all in this together and we're all imperfect and we all, deserve some amount of grace, and we all need to find a way that we can trust each other. Because it's a very lonely world if we can't trust each other. And one of the greatest um, skills or inherent abilities of human beings is that we can get together. We can come together and form alliances and work together toward building bigger things. And that's what apologies and kind of opened the door to is how do we work together?
Sid, the reason why I reached out to you was because a few months ago, uh, and this is not just then, but it's trying not to be political, but Trump said some very horrible things about some people that died. He was wrong, and he would never apologize. And I was thinking, it's more than just Trump. There's something involved in our culture. What's the difference between our culture, the American culture, and apologies, and say Japan or Asian cultures with regards to apology? And how does that impact the people?
I never thought about it too much as that I started teaching this class. And, in Japan, executives apologize all the time for all kinds of things that they had nothing to do with. And so, if a plane crashes, the president will apologize on behalf of the company and go to the families and apologize to the families for the loss of their loved one. And they don't think of it in terms of, that someone's at fault or anything like that. It's more a sign of respect, of acknowledging the harm and loss that someone else has suffered, empathy for that person. And, there is a, a concept called procedural justice, which Tom Tyler has written about, and he said Yale. And basically, the concept of procedural justice is that if you have four elements, if you give people voice, if you give them respect and dignity, if you give them a neutral set of rules that is not affected by people's whims, and if you have trustworthy people administrating those rules, people will abide by the decisions regardless of whether they're in their favor or not. And it's because those four elements, if you have them, people feel that they've been treated fairly. And that allows us to live together without killing each other, without fighting all the time, and working together towards some greater purpose. And so this concept of apologizing in the Eastern area and being reluctant to do it on the Western side is is I think clouded by this philosophy of one way, one truth, one God, and that we need to kind of appreciate that we all see things a little bit differently, that we're all imperfect. In fact, it's in our Constitution, and ironically, we don't appreciate it, that we are, attempting to form a more perfect union. It assumes our imperfection. And so it is part of our foundation, and I think our founding fathers actually appreciated this, and by keeping religion out of the governance and separating church and state and the like, and that people cannot people it appreciates that we have different perspective, and works to try to set up systems in which our different perspectives can work together as opposed to against each other.
Sid, let's go back to your class. Tell us about the key elements of your course. I assume it goes for a semester. And tell us some of the stories and situations you've come across from your students. I'd like to hear about those. I think everybody would.
Well, it's hard to capsulize what we talk about in the class, but it's a class about imperfection. It's a class about building trust, and it's a class about trying to find ways in which we can acknowledge a common set of values that we all live by. And part of apologies and forgiveness and reconciliation is to acknowledge what we have in common. And we do it in different ways, and I think that the class kind of talks about the different kinds of apologies and how forgiveness allows us to be unshackled from the past, and how reconciliation requires a tremendous amount of acknowledgement by both sides. and that there's these concepts about restorative justice, where we start to think about what we were thinking when we caused the harm, and on the other side, how that harm has caused what is done to us. And there are incredible stories about how people have reconciled over time, and the stories range from sons being killed, and the father of the son embracing and adopting the killer, and there's stories of people who have found ways in which to not only forgive but to embrace those who have caused harm to their families, and it's just it's a very rich area, and probably the most important concept is this concept called moral elevation. And the idea is that what we do inspires others to do the same thing. It's like in Hawaii, we have this concept called aloha. And traditionally it's thought of as being giving without an expectation of return. And then I realize that's not true. We don't give without an expectation of return. We give not expecting something right back, but we give with an expectation that people will appreciate our giving, that they will appreciate that giving and will be inspired to give to others. And that's what creates that culture of aloha, is to give without expectation of return, and to expect others to appreciate that and give on. The
But
most
so,
dramatic.
so a corollary would be not only to give without hesitation, but even to forget, to apologize without hesitation.
That's right. And one of the most dramatic examples of this is a few years ago, when a white man sat in a black church Bible study in South Carolina, and sat there for an hour with them, and pulled out a gun and killed 9 of the parishioners, hoping to start a race war. And he was caught the next day, and he was brought to a bond hearing. And one of the sisters and several of the relatives of the people that were killed the night before forgave him. They forgave him out of a religious belief that it is their goal to forgive. Um, and that amazing grace that they displayed by forgiving the day after this man killed their relative, eventually, in a couple of weeks, caused the state legislature and governor of South Carolina to take down the Confederate flag and to remove the Confederate monuments from the state grounds. Um, the people that forgave, the family members that forgave, they didn't ask for this. They didn't expect it. But there was kind of a moral elevation that took place, that basically compelled the legislature and the governor to feel compelled, even though this had been a controversial issue for years and years and years. They felt compelled to take down the flag and to remove the Confederate monuments.
So there are further impacts from the actions of apologies and forgiveness and all of that. And that's very interesting. And it would seem to me that I'd like you to comment on this. Apologizing and forgiveness is a part of doing grace in society. How do you feel about that?
Oh yes, I mean, that act of grace that we give each other is an act of respect and acknowledgement of the dignity of the other person. Um,
So no, I agree. But so why do we have such trouble here in America with especially the youth? I think, at least that's been my experience. They just cannot say they're sorry. I found that with employees. I found that with other people where they've made huge mistakes, uh, done things that have hurt others, and they will not even for one moment say, I'm sorry. And I once had an employee do something that was terrible and impacted this medical office with regards to discovery I was doing, got everybody upset, and they just were besides themselves. And I explained it to her, and I said, well, what do you think about that? She goes, okay. I said, well, don't you feel sorry? And she said, let's move on. That was her comment. Let's move on.
Well, I
What's
think
about?
it's a reflection of our feeling that to apologize is to show weakness. To apologize is to admit fault. To apologize is to somehow diminish your stature. And people who are confident are not as concerned about that, but people who are feeling on the margins are very worried about that. You know, when I first was going to teach this class, I asked everybody I could find, for stories about apologies, forgiveness, and reconciliation. And one of the first guys that I asked was somebody who was shadowing me for mediation. And I asked him, and he said, "Well, yeah, I got a good story for you." And he says, "I said, yeah, what was it?" And he says, "I committed malpractice." And I said, well, "Okay, I got to hear this story. This is a good one." And he told me that he had blown the statute of limitation, and he went to his client and he apologized and he said, "I'm sorry about this whole thing, and you can sue me, you can sue the insurance company, we can, whatever it is, but I blew it, and so I apologize." And she felt badly that he had to apologize and had to, do all these kinds of things, and they worked it out. And then she referred him a new client. When you
Yeah,
think about that, you think,
yeah,
how can that be? But there's a mediator by the name of San Adri who has this trust equation. He says trust equals, and he has on the other side an equation, a fraction. And on the top of that fraction is credibility. If you're credible, people trust you. You know,
yes,
plus reliability. If you do what you say, people trust you. Plus vulnerability. The more vulnerable you are, the more you put yourself out there and be vulnerable, the more people trust you. And on the bottom of that equation is self-concern. The more you're protecting yourself, the less people trust you, right? The more you try to look out for yourself and avoid any kind of criticism and all that, the less people trust you. And I've seen this over and over again, where a realtor that I had blew did not look at the paperwork well. I was selling some land, so there wasn't addresses. There was only the tax key numbers, and the tax key numbers got transposed a little bit. I had several lots involved in this particular thing, and the buyer transposed the number at some point during the back and forth of all the paperwork. And they were going to buy a more valuable land at a lesser price. And so the realtor immediately called me up when they realized what the error was. And they called me up and they told me what happened, and they apologized for messing up, and they offered to pay the difference between the price of the other property and the price of the one that they messed up on. They changed the numbers on and all that. And I listened to them, and my reaction was, no, I'm not going to let you pay that difference, because I suspected that the buyer knew exactly what they were doing, and they were trying to take advantage of this situation and take advantage of the mistake of the realtors that were involved in this transaction. So I said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I said, instead, we're going to talk directly with the buyer, and we're going to try to cancel this transaction. And we went through the whole process, and eventually, in a very quick mediation and all that, we got a resolution. And there was a slight payment, but that payment was far, far less. And I said, okay, you can pay that difference, and all that. But it made me not want to simply go along because of their honesty and their willingness to expose themselves, to be vulnerable, and to not be concerned about themselves, but to be concerned about me and my well-being and all that.
Yeah, I want to say two things. One, I align with that, and I'll give you an example of myself from like 45 years ago when I was a baby lawyer. And then I'd like us to open it up to everybody and see if they have questions or comments or thoughts, because clearly this is an open-ended discussion. It's an issue that's so significant to our American society and so important in terms of understanding the mediation process. So about 45 years ago, I'd been practicing about 5, 6 years, and I had done a commercial eviction of a small Chinese restaurant, Mid-Wilshire area, and they never came back for their property. And I had a judgment, and I decided, well, let's have a sheriff's sale. Well, again, I was a baby lawyer and I stupidly didn't do a UCC1 search to realize that the Bank of Toronto had a security interest in their cups and spoons and teapots and all of that. And so I got a call about a year later from the attorney in LA for the bank, and I realized that I had messed up. So the very first thing I did was call my client, who was my biggest client and was my biggest client for about 30 years. And I said, Michael, I've made a significant mistake, and I want to come down and discuss it with you. And I laid it all out for him. And I said, our firm will take care of this. We'll be responsible for any lien claim of the bank. And he said, no, you're not. I go, why? I thought he was going to say you're fired. He said, because no one's ever treated me this way. He said, I have big firms that I work with. They never admit that they're wrong. They always try to delay and play games. He said, I just am so pleased that you've come and told this to me. Now, simmer down, Bob. It's going to be okay. And I met with the attorney for the bank, and we talked about UCLA sports, and he'd been a Bruin and all that. And you know what? He said, okay, I understand. Forget it. Have a nice day. And it turned out fine. But I think that apologies can make such a difference in your life in terms of client relations, with complaints to the bar, and in every phase of your life, your children, etc., your spouse. So, okay, enough of my philosophizing from a working man's level. What we have a big group here, over 50 people. Anybody have any questions or comments for Sid? Nelson Timken is a very well-known mediator, author, who puts out wonderful articles on the theory of mediation and different aspects. Edward, do you have anything you'd like to say? I mean, Nelson, excuse me.
He lies. That's embarrassing, but thank you so much for the kind words. It's been my experience, and please don't all start firing arrows at me, that many people in the ADR community are loath to apologize. And in fact, I apologize because I make so many mistakes and say so many things that I shouldn't have said. And I was told by one person that it's no good to say the wrong thing or something that shouldn't be said at all and then apologize. And that's the reason that I have the bad reputation that I have. And so sometimes my comment is that sometimes when you do apologize, people tell you that you should be more careful in the first instance in what you do, and that apologizing after the fact is no good. What about that?
Well, I think it's uh, people try to build patterns and they try to interpret what you're doing, and to this extent that they think that you're intentionally not thinking and trying to make up for it by apologizing or something like that. Maybe that's something that they would, be thinking about when they're doing. But here's what I've found as a mediator is that whatever you think someone else is thinking, or whatever you think is the motivation behind what somebody else is doing, you don't know until you ask them. and you might suspect all kinds of things about the other person, but until you ask them and ask them with an open-ended question that allows them to tell you what they're thinking, not verifying or denying what you think they're thinking, you don't know. And so, I think a lot of this has to do with us learning how to not just give grace, but be open to hearing what other people are really thinking. And sometimes they don't even know. When they say things, they don't know what they're thinking. But if you probe a little bit, you start to help them to understand what they're thinking.
I think that's a very good point. The idea of open-ended questions. And for some of us that have been litigators, it's hard to kind of do that. We're not trained to ask, why did you do this? That's the exact opposite of what we ever do in court. So I think that's a wonderful point. And I also think that people that say that are judgmental and probably quick to criticize others. And all right, what about judgment?
Well, you got another
Judgmental.
hand up here, Alberto.
Okay, go ahead,
Oh,
Alberto.
Hi, everybody. What about non-apology apologies or like phony apologies? Something like, "Well, I'm sorry you felt that way." How
yes.
how do you think about that, and how do you deal with them?
Well, it's exactly what you say. It's a phony apology. It's not a real apology, and part of apologies is the sincerity behind it. And so non-apologies is fake apologies is almost worse than not saying anything. And so um, I think it comes right back to that formula. Is that why are we doing this? Why are we apologizing at all? And I think that why we do this, if we are sincere about it, is to readjust the relationships between everybody and to try to reestablish trust among everybody. And so one of the analogies that we use in class is the idea of an elevator, that our apology allows us to humble ourselves a little bit in order to bring ourselves down from being the perpetrator of harm to someone who is saying, "Hey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I caused this particular harm." And the sorries can be all different kinds of sorries. Sorries can be sorry that I had nothing to do with this situation. I'm sorry about the weather, kind of thing. And it's more empathy that you're expressing in that particular setting. Or it might be, I'm sorry that I am giving you this shot and it's hurting you because it is hurting you and all that. But I think this is important and you need this shot. And we do those kinds of things. But so all different kinds of apologies. But fake apologies, you're right. It it doesn't count as an apology.
No, it's actually worse. And it just occurred to me, maybe we need to teach children in school what apologies are about. And conditional apologies can be devastating.
Yeah, but there's also the apology where your mother says, "You go over there and apologize." All right. What you're doing there is really not acknowledging the other person or respecting the other person. You're basically respecting your mother and basically saying, I'm going to please my mother by going over there and apologizing. So it's apologies and forgiveness and reconciliation are all context based.
Right.
There's not a single way of doing things and all that. And part of this class is, in fact, I start the class with a picture of a Japanese ceramic bowl that is cracked, and the cracks are repaired by gold, very bold
Leaf.
gold,
Leaf.
yeah, gold leaf, but it's basically you can see it throughout all the cracks, and this art form is called kintsugi. It's you actually make a bowl, you break it, and then you patch it up with this gold leaf and all that. And the idea is to emphasize the imperfection, to emphasize the not the beauty of the perfection of the bowl, but rather the imperfection of the bowl, because it's through imperfection that we learn. It's through imperfection that we appreciate. It's through imperfection that we can empathize and understand each other, because we're all imperfect. And once we appreciate that, it's a lot easier to make enemies into friends. Abraham Lincoln once said that the best way to destroy an enemy is to make him a friend. And in order to make them a friend, you have to, admit to or appreciate that their imperfections, are not because you are perfect, but it's because we all have those imperfections.
Oh, so when you mediate, Sydney, do you ever discuss with the attorneys, maybe in a separate room, or even the parties, maybe in a joint session, the concept of apology? Does that ever come up? How do you integrate apology into the mediation process, if ever? And one of our attendees said the power of apology or even acknowledgement of harm in mediation really helps move settlement forward. And so many organizations are afraid of admitting any liability. And I think there are some journal articles about apologies in legal settings and how they can be fostered and not cause harm to the person making the apology. But do you ever get into that issue when you mediate?
Yeah, I got to think back, but I think there have been several instances where people wanted to apologize, and so I give them free rein to do that. But I think that when people think it's just transactional, that if I apologize, I'll get a better deal. If I apologize, I'll be forgiven. If they think of it in transactional terms, then it doesn't usually have the desired effect. I think it has a extremely powerful effect, but it has to be sincere, and it has to be not about, I'm doing this for me. I want to get this off my chest. I'm doing this to get a better deal or something like that. It's that same Sam-Adric equation, that the more you're focused on yourself, the less effective the apology is. The more you're focused on the other, the more effective the apology is. And
Right.
that's really the key to the whole thing.
Yeah, I don't do divorce mediation, although I went through divorce, and that made me realize I don't want to be a divorce mediator. But it would seem to me that would become a very important concept in those sorts of mediations. Has that ever come up?
The opening scene of Wedding Crashers is a divorce mediation. And it's actually really good. I recommend it highly to people, because it's about reminding people about telling a different story. We get locked into a story where we hate the other person for whatever reason, for something they did or whatever it is. But sometimes when we get locked into that story, we forget all the other stories that are associated with this relationship. And when you help people to remember those other stories, it helps them to be much more compassionate, much more forgiving, much more empathetic towards the other side. I started the mediations in the children's court, where parents were fighting about the joint parenting of the child, and basically they had a lot of baggage with each other. They hated each other. They were just wanted to do harm to each other, really. And we get into the mediation, and one of the tricks that we came up with was basically to ask each of the parents for a picture of their child. And usually these were joint sessions, and they would usually have it on their phone. And we would ask them, show us a picture of the child that we're talking about, the children that we're talking about. And they would show us the pictures, and it did two things. One, it gave us a picture of what kind of activities they have fun engaging because you can see it's not just children that are engaged in some kind of activity. And two, it focused the parents on why we're here. We're not here for you to fight this battle that you've had for a long period of time and all the mistakes that you've made a long time in the past. We're here for the future of this child, for the next 18 years or however long it's going to take for this child. Um, it, we're here to work out a plan for this child. And it really did an amazing job of refocusing the discussion to the point where, people, would say, oh, no, that's not going to work for her. And they'd be much more compassionate and understanding and to work things out and all that, because it was changing their story from, I hate this person, to, I have to do the best for my child for the future.
Interesting. Let's see. Nelson, you again made an interesting comment about how you think apologies can be integrated into the process. Do you want to comment on that? Oops, you're muted. You are muted.
Going to what Sydney just said about how you hearken back to better times, which is a technique that's frequently used. And when you hearken back to better times, you remind people that they weren't always locked in dispute mode, that there were times when they actually got along fairly well. And reminding them about the better times is often a way of steering the conversation to a desire to renew those relationships. And so once you're there, you say to them, well, you guys are part of a small community, assuming it's a commercial transaction. You guys are in construction and you run into the same people over and over again in construction, as you know. And you're going to have to deal with these people in the future. And you guys used to get along. Let me ask you, what would it take for that relationship to go back to the way it was? And let them tell you, well, I guess I could apologize for my role in it. And that's one way of kind of steering things to where an apology might work well. And in that situation, I've seen it work very well, where look, John, we were both wrong. I'll apologize for my role in this. If you apologize for your role in this, we'll just work it out.
One of the things that comes up in our class is whether you have to get an apology in order to forgive and all that kind of things, and who goes first, basically. And I think that is an unnecessary, I mean, it is an obstacle that takes courage to go first, but it's the courage to try to create the culture that we want for ourselves. And when in Hawaii there's a dispute resolution system called Ho'oponopono, and it's a system where the ohana, the family, gets together. And a family is not just relatives; it's like friends and all kinds of people that are connected. But the idea is that whatever that ohana is that gets together, and the main rule in Ho'oponopono is that nobody points to anybody else. Nobody says they did this or says what somebody else did. Everybody only can talk about what they did to contribute to the problem. And so the people that are fighting usually are not the ones that go first. It's usually other people that say, I knew that they were really upset and I didn't step in, all that. Or, I overheard them yelling at each other and I didn't do anything to try to calm the situation or something like that. And eventually you almost shame the people into admitting how they contributed to the problem, kind of thing. The primary people contributing to the problem. And there's a lot of crying, all kinds of things like that. But the idea being that other people, nothing is just between a couple of people. Everybody's affected in some way. And when you start to show people how you're affecting a lot of people, it helps them to realize that this is not just me and you. I'm affecting a whole bunch of people, and you're almost compelled to admit to your contribution how you can make things better, and that's in part kind of the idea behind procedural justice, where you're talking about what did you think when you were doing this, and what were you thinking, and on the other side, what were you thinking when you heard that you were when you realized that you'd been harmed in this fashion and all that. And it can have extremely dramatic effects where people you don't think would ever reconcile would reconcile. And one of the most prominent ones is a book called Picking Cotton, and it's with Ron Cotton and sorry, I can't remember the woman's name, but the woman was in North Carolina and she got raped. A guy came into her bedroom and raped her. And, she went to a lineup and picked out this guy, Ron Cotton, and said that he was the rapist. And he was the wrong guy. And he went through trial beyond a reasonable doubt and was convicted and was sentenced to prison. And he spent, I think, 16 years in prison. And eventually, the Innocence Project would test his DNA and things like that and find out that he's not the right person. And so he could have come out bitter and angry and he did. I mean, he was bitter that he had to spend all that time in jail. But something about him and her, she felt horrible that she had convicted the wrong person because she was so certain that he was the person that she reached out and basically they talked and became friends and understood each other, and they started going around the country talking about the dangers of limited lineups and things like that, and eyewitness identification and different things, but showing that there is a way that you can reconcile with people that you would think you'd hate for the rest of your life.
Right. They made peace. So going back to your class, do you have any, I know that you're just in your second semester now teaching your class. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you have any goals for the students about changing the way others look at apologies and forgiveness and reconciliation? How do we change the temperature in amongst lawyers and amongst our population? Do you have any goals on that regard?
Well, what I keep talking about in class is the idea that culture is created by individuals. That what we do, and like you're driving along and a car wants to cut into your lane. Do you slow down and let them come in and give them, that cutting in? You're getting out of a parking lot from a big event and you're trying to get home. Everybody's kind of bunching up trying to get out, and somebody's trying to back out of a stall or something like that. Do you give them room to come out, or you just drive by and keep on, going close to the bumper of the car in front of you to not let them get in? That is culture. That is sending a message to other people that this is the way it is, that it's every man for himself, it's me first, or it is a culture of kindness that giving grace and allowing people to come in. It is thanking people when they do something nice for you. It's just with the wave of the hand, or allowing people to come in to cut into the line as we're going along and things like that. Those little things are what create our culture. And it, as lawyers, Shakespeare's anarchists said the first thing you do, let's kill all the lawyers. was a testament to how important we are in creating culture, in creating a system where we keep the society together. Our job as lawyers is not to be warriors. Our job as lawyers is to be agreement makers. That's what we do. We go to the jury and we try to get them to agree with us. We go to the judge and we try to get them to agree with us. We go to our opponents in 98 to 99% of the cases, and we try to reach an agreement, not necessarily agree, in what we want, but an agreement that we jointly agree on and going forward. And so in essence, whether we're in court, in negotiation, in litigation, whether we're transactional in terms of building projects for the future, or whether it's regulatory, where we're going to the government, we're trying to reach agreements in all these settings. And so our job, in large part, is to remind our fellow citizens of the agreements that we have, the conventions that we have, the Constitution, the statutes, the contracts, the social norms that we have. We are the leaders of this reinforcing these agreements that we have so that we can live together, that we can work together, so that we don't have to fear each other. Pew did a study a few years ago. Not a few years ago, just a few weeks ago. I think it's last month or something, that they surveyed 25 countries. And out of the 25 countries, only one country had a majority of the population thinking that their fellow citizens were morally bad. Only one out of 25. And that one was the United States, and the majority of people thought that their fellow citizens were morally bad in all the other countries. Going up to Canada, where 90% of the people thought their fellow citizens were morally good. We have to stop thinking of things as warriors, because warriors can't be trusted. Warriors, if they're doing their job, will kill you no matter what. And so if we think of ourselves as warriors, and we encourage others to think of themselves as warriors, and our ABA, started off talking about integrity and having everybody believe in our system of justice and things like that in 1909. And in 1983, they changed the model rules to include this concept of zealous advocacy. And that zealous advocacy concept didn't exist in the prior model rules, but that 1983 version of zealous advocacy has created this mentality that we can be warriors and somehow justice will be done. In fact, it says that in the preamble, that if there are two warriors against each other, we can assume that justice will be done. But we can't assume that we have to actively try to create those kind of conditions. We have to, in little individual acts, build our culture of trust, not a culture of fear and disdain and separation of us versus them in whatever other context. It's up to us, and so I think that we have a serious obligation to help our fellow citizens become friends and talk to each other and listen to each other and try to find a way in which we can work together.
Interesting. There's certainly a dichotomy there between the successful trial lawyers to win at any cost and what you're talking about. And
well, even successful trial lawyers, if you really listen to very successful trial lawyers, they have to get the jury to join them. And Aristotle said there's three elements. There's ethos, pathos, and logos. And ethos is the credibility and believability of the speaker, and pathos is the emotional connection of the speaker to the audience. And logos is logic. And one of the problems for lawyers is that logic justifies the result, but logic does not persuade. And you will find the logic. Once we believe in the speaker, once we feel the speaker is right, we'll find the logic to justify following the speaker's lead. But when we go to law school, that model of persuasion that has lasted for thousands of years is turned on its head. And we start to think that logic is most important, that passion shouldn't matter, and that all people are created equal. And in essence, our legal education that helps us to think like a lawyer makes us dumber. And so all these trial institutes that are out there, in part, what they're doing is helping us lawyers become people again, become people like everybody else that understood that it is the credibility, the believable, the passion, and that logic just justifies. We can justify any kind of situation once we believe and we feel that someone's right. And so that's, I think that what we have to get back to. It's not that people are not logical. Daniel Kahneman got a Nobel Prize showing that even when we think we're logical, we're not really logical. It's all driven by emotion. And if we don't have that emotion, then we won't be able to make any decisions. It's emotions that are driving us, by and large. And so appreciating that, we have to find a way in which we can come back to what our founders really understood, that in order to make a more perfect or union, that we have to find a way to bring everybody together, to be equal, and to join together, and to want to join together.
That's a very nice thought. And it seems to me that what we need to do as lawyers and as people is just remind ourselves and others when we can of the power of apology and how that can mend fences and help people move on. I think we're going to wrap it now for today. I think it's been a very deep conversation, and Sydney, you can tell, is a deep thinker. And I'd like to thank those of you that have contributed. And this is a subject that basically is open-ended. It's something that I think we need to think about and try to practice in our lives. And anything that we can do in that regard, I think, helps people. So I want to thank you very much for attending today. I hope you feel that you got something out of it, perhaps some inspiration from Sydney and some good thoughts from our contributors. And I wish you well, and we'll be back again next month with another mediation program, an ADR program. So Sydney, thank you so much, and thank you all for participating. I found it very interesting today. A lot of food for thought. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.